Hello, everyone. My name is Ricardo Guerrero, here as a student at Glendale Community College. And today I want to continue where I left off on the previous episode regarding the events of the Yazidi genocide. Specifically, I'll go more in depth with the Sinjar massacre, which encompasses most of the Yazidi genocide as a whole, as this event was the result of as many as 200,000 Yazidis getting displaced from their homes, forced to seek refuge elsewhere, either up in Mount Sinjar or to a different country. The events leading up to Mount Sinjar began with propaganda spreading throughout Iraq. According to Nadia Murad, a survivor of the genocide, pointed out that ISIS planned on the mass murder due to their research of the Yazidi faith, including that since they did not have traditional holy texts, unlike those of the Abrahamic religions, they can be systemically raped. This warped morality allowed them to justify their own actions as they carried out several ways to initially disturb the Yazidi population, such as creating pamphlets on how to take in Yazidi captive and slaves, which had material on the justification of prepubescent intercourse. However, according to EIU Viewswire, ISIS quickly escalated to direct warfare against the Yazidis when on August 2014, Kurdish forces announced that they would be abandoning the city of Sijar, leaving them with no leverage for safety against foreign invaders. This permitted ISIS to massacre and enslave the Yazidi population to how they saw fit, beginning the events of the Sinjar massacre. The Sinjar massacre was a short lived event with long lasting effects. The event only took place between August 3rd through 14th of 2014. On August 3rd, after the announcement of Peshmerga's leave from the city, citizens were quickly bombshelled by mortars throughout the night and up to the day. On August 4th and up through the 14th, ISIS captured Sinjar, or at least held it captive, where they forced citizens to convert religions for their own lives, where otherwise they would be killed. Although the tragedy was short lived, ISIS still occupied the area for over a year, where, according to Telegraph magazine, it took more than 14 months before coalition airstrikes and Kurdish Peshmerga boots on the ground resulted in the withdrawal of the Islamic State fighters, and the Kurdish soldiers retook the town. The impact, however, and casualties were of great magnitude, where, according to the Telegraph magazine, over 5,000 men in the Yazidi population were murdered, 2,000 Yazidi women and young girls were kidnapped, forced to become slaves and servants, and a total of 200,000 residents were forced to flee from their homes and seek refuge elsewhere. However, the tragedies extended far beyond the massacre could with the Yazidi people. To get a glimpse of what the Yazidi population went through during ISIS occupation of Sinjar, I would like to reference Nadia Murad, a Yazidi woman who had directly faced the tragedy as a teenager and now lives to dedicate her life in spreading the message for the justice of Yazidi 9 years later. In her book, The Last Girl, she describes her personal events of what she went through during her encampment at ISIS. She began to note that the Sinjar massacre began on August 4th, 2014, where a few days ISIS had launched surprise attacks on several nearby villages, driving thousands of Yazidis out of their homes and toward Mount Sinjar. The militants killed anyone who refused to convert to Islam or who was too stubborn and confused to flee, shooting them or cutting their throats. During these events, Peshmerga, the military of the region that surrounded Sinjar, fled the city, resulting in the invasion to expand up to Sinjar, where many Yazidis were already fleeing up to Mount Sinjar and advanced. Murad further highlights that as the Yazidi fled up to the mountains, many dropped what they were carrying, such as strollers, coats, cooking pots, and other essentials, proving the dire situation that people were placed in to avoid being killed and enslaved. However, up Sinjar Mountain was no better for the refugees, as Yazidis were searching for food and water, even missing relatives, but many turned to be unsuccessful, as ISIS was able to quickly occupy several towns around the city, leaving the Yazidi no choice but to linger in hunger and fear that the relatives may be under ISIS, where their fate is unknown. Yet, apart from most of the population being displaced from their homes, there was thousands of young Yazidi girls who were captured and then used under ISIS. Murad's reflection on the abuse of what she and other young girls went through during their time under ISIS enslavement perfectly pictures the horror of the genocide. ISIS would control groups of Yazidis under schoolyard and dilapidated buildings, where she says, and I quote, "The school where I had spent so many years learning and making friends now looked like a different place. Weeping filled the room, but if anyone screamed or asked what was happening, an Islamic State militant would scream back to shut up. Everyone except the very old or the very young was standing." End quote. Victims would be further taken advantage as many young girls were molested, often either getting their breasts fondled or groin touched. Finally, I would like to highlight one more story from a young girl who told hers through the Nadia Initiative. Her name is Samar, a young Yazidi girl, where she told her story of when she was also held captive in an abandoned kindergarten, being forced into a makeshift lottery, where she could be selected for one out of these three things: being forced into marriage, death, or even serving in ISIS's family. Samar would then go on to say, and I quote, "I was chosen to be a servant. I served the house for 2 years." End quote. The way that ISIS decided to play with these innocent people and use them for their own selfish desires before executing them in front of their families is nothing short of sickening. I want to end this off with the overall reaction received from the Sinjar massacre, which is nothing short of saddening, as few got involved with the issue at hand at what was happening at the Yazidi population. For example, the US set a ban at the time on letting any more Iraqis to travel into the country, including those of the Yazidi, preventing refuge to their homeland. According to Vian Dakil, an Iraqi member of parliament shows her shock on the ban placed against the Yazidi, saying that, "Isn't it strange?" Well, and I quote, "Isn't it strange that the President of the United States will equalize between the victim and the executioner?" End quote. And I unfortunately think it is. And it shows just how much the Yazidi suffered, only to not be given a helping hand when needed most. Something worth thinking about. Ricardo signing off.